sound. When the work week's done and the weekend rolls round, everybody knows where I can be found. I'll be fishing all night and day, strapping from the shore, fluking in the bay. If there's ice in the cooler, I'm okay.
How's everybody doing? Hope you guys are enjoying the show so far. A lot of good vendors out there, a lot of good seminars going on too. Could be the last seminar for the night here. We got shorebound blackfishing. So we'll start to like how I got my start into shorebound blackfishing. I used to do I still do a lot of striped bass fishing after dark, stuff like that. But obviously fishing after dark for striped bass, night and night and night again, you're gonna be burning it on both ends right there. So you know, if you want, it's more of an enjoyable, obviously daytime kind of fishing where you don't have to be up endless hours of the night going, you know, hunting for these fish. Typically, the really nice thing about these shorebound blackfish is any of the spots that you think may have blackfish that are within casting distance from the shore, they typically do have them, and there's a lot of spots like that. And the really nice thing about it is those spots that do hold blackfish, pretty much if you go there, as long as the tide is right and it's not flying too fast, those fish are always going to be there for the most part, as long as it's not too cold out. So when I say not too cold, I mean pretty much the month of October is your best window of opportunity for fishing for these shorebound blackfish. Season opens up on Saturday on the North Shore, so obviously there's a lot of spots on the North Shore you can do this. Season opens up the 15th on the South Shore. The line for the South Shore is Orient Point going straight out, so that means if you're on the right side of Orient Point, off the shore over there, that's South Shore regulations. If you're in anywhere inside of Peconic Bay, South Shore regulations. And of course, the South Shore itself is South Shore regulations, including Montauk. So both these areas open up, like I said, within the next week. So it's happening right now. So this is a very relevant seminar to what is going on very soon. Again, as I said, one of the most attractive parts of this kind of fishing to me is you could do it during daylight hours. You don't have to go out all hours of the night, and I'm very confident in these spots that I go to that there are always blackfish there. How aggressively they feed, that's up to them. But you know, that depends on the tide sometimes. You know, what side of the tide they're feeding on, or if they're feeding on the slack or something like that. But these fish are always there, and I always have a shot at them. Obviously, with striped bass like to swim around a lot more. They migrate. They can be somewhere one day, and the next day, you know, they could be 10 miles down the beach or something like that, or you know, right off the beach very far. So that's why I really like the blackfish. Another reason is obviously for all those who have caught blackfish before, I'm sure you know how these fish fight. These fish are excellent fighters, especially on the proper tackle. If you're not using like a meat stick of a rod, if you're using the proper rod for fishing for these fish, you get a really good bend in the rod out of them. They take some drag. They really will challenge you. Like I said, you don't want to go too heavy, but these fish will run right for the rocks, and you really got to be on your game to keep these fish out of the rocks. So between the accessibility, the fish being there, and the fight that these fish pose to people using the proper tackle, I think it's a very attractive fish to go after. We'll start with some spots. So I mentioned before that as far as shorebound blackfish goes, a lot of spots that I think may have had these, you know, blackfish, and I'm talking not even, you know, on open water. I'm talking back in the bay and stuff like that. A lot of these spots that are accessible within reach of shore, they will have blackfish. You know, so if you think there might be blackfish in a certain spot, you know, and when I say spot, I mean bridge pilings, rock piles, dock pilings, even open bottom where there's mussel beds on the bottom. You know, all those spots have a chance to hold blackfish. So if you think there might be a blackfish holding in a certain spot, you know, you should try it, because chances are they probably are there. Let's start with spots. So obviously the entire North Shore stretch of the island is pretty much made up of all rocks, especially early in the season. A lot of these rocks, you know, obviously are very close. The blackfish are very close early in the season as well. You know, they're right on the shore pretty much. My basic general rule of thumb when I fish on the North Shore for blackfish is a lot of the time, I do a lot of fishing on the North Fork of the island. So I'm talking, way out east, all these rocky points, rocky areas where I can visually see rocks in front of me out of the water. Chances are there's probably about 8 to 10 feet of water next to the rock because the water does drop off pretty far on the North Shore. And I will focus on spots like that. So spots I can see there's an eddy formed by a rock. I know there's a big rock underwater there. If I could see the top of the rock peeking above the water, I know there's a lot of structure of rock underneath the water there as well. So I'll focus on spots like that. Obviously, the temperature, the tide drops on the North Shore, they are a lot more severe compared to the South Shore. So you're seeing sometimes 6, 7, 8 feet tidal difference between high and low tide on the North Shore. For North Shore blackfish, typically I'll fish always the higher points of the tide because it seems like these fish pulling a little closer. You can hit those closer in rocks when the tide is a lot higher. So obviously, a spot where there may have been 10 feet of water at high tide, at low tide, there could be 4 feet or 3 feet of water, something like that. So high tide, obviously, is the best time to fish for these blackfish, on the North Shore, in my opinion. I will typically fish the last hour of the incoming. The slack period has a lot of potential as well, especially for bigger fish. I found out these bigger fish, sometimes they get a slight, some bigger ones when the tide slacks off a little bit. And then the beginning of the outgoing. Doesn't mean they're not going to feed on, when the tide really picks up, but you can't use as light of tackle, especially in certain areas when the tide really does pick up. So a lot of times I like to use no more than 3 or 4 ounces if I'm throwing a rig setup. And then especially when the tide slacks off, I really like to use jigs a lot. So I'll use anywhere from like a half to a 3/4 to maybe a 1 ounce jig when the tide really slacks out and I can really kind of finesse these blackfish. So go back to spots, circle back around on that. Anywhere on the North Shore where you can see visual rocks in front of you, you could see kind of like an eddy forming in the water within casting distance. Sometimes these rocks are within here to the door, that far away. They're not far at all, just pitching right to them. So if you can see an eddy forming on top, you can visually see rocks on top. Those are all great spots. Doesn't mean that there aren't going to be blackfish on spots where there aren't as many big rocks. Sometimes blackfish will hang on to little tiny like boulder fields where the boulders are the size of like a softball or a bowling ball or something like that. Again, there's some mussel beds on the North Shore as well. Blackfish will be always on that structure too. Some other great spots also, if you guys know anything, you see bridge piling, stuff like that. There's a lot of bridges on the island. Like I said, there's bridges out west, there's bridges out east as well. All these bridge pilings, they all will hold blackfish also. So if you can access pilings that are within range of shore, it's a great idea to target these pilings. Sometimes you don't even have to cast out to them. You can drop straight down right next to a piling. If you can get on a dock or something like that, drop straight down and you can fish them straight up and down, which is really easy. Like I said, sometimes, again, you don't have to cast at all, which is great because when you cast sometimes, it's a better chance you get snagged up because you get dragged across the bottom. So again, like on the South Shore, you have all these bridges, great place to target on. Current moves a little bit on the South Shore. There's a lot of snags on the bridges sometimes. So again, fishing the slower periods of tide as the tide starts to slow down a little bit, the slack period, especially around the pilings, and the pickup period as well. What I also noticed, I'll circle back around, it also applies to the North Shore as well, where these rock piles are, is that more times when say the tide always moves one way or the other. So say, right, I'm facing Connecticut. Right, I'm facing out of Connecticut. To my right is going out to the to Orient Point, and to my left is going toward the western sound. So if you have an outgoing tide in the sound, the water's going to be going. I know this is a back eddy. For the most part, it's going to be going toward Orient Point. A lot of times, I found that these fish will set up on the backside of the rocks that are breaking the current. They feed a lot more aggressive in there. You also have to remember, if there is any amount of current, a lot of times if you're fishing on, again, say it's outgoing tide, and your rig is moving this way, all it's going to happen is you're just going to keep pushing your rig or your jig right into that rock, and it's going to probably snag you up a lot easier. Again, I found out a lot of the fish like to hang out in that back eddy area behind the rocks where they can break the current, they can feed more aggressively, you know, especially when there's a lot of tide. Same goes for bridge pilings as well. If you guys can see like a larger bridge piling or something like that, and you can see this sort of a back eddy forming behind that piling, chances are that that's probably your best place to cast a rig for blackfish. Aside from the jetties and the north shore of the island, another great place to focus for blackfish obviously is all the south shore jetties on the island. So you have Shinnecock Inlet, Mauritius Inlet, there's a lot of rock structure in Fire Island Inlet, Jones Inlet, going out to Rockaway. All those spots all have rock formations, and they obviously have blackfish. A lot of people make the mistake of casting too far off the rocks. All these blackfish, again, all these jetties, they live right up in the rocks, like right in close. So a lot of the times you're pitching really close to you. Snagging is all part of it, but you know, those fish are right in the rocks. They come out from, they live in the rocks sometimes. I talked to the divers. They told me this, you know, when they go down there, they see these fish in the rocks with just their faces hanging out. So they're in those rocks, breaking the current, you know, eating, you know, who knows what. Funny thing, last year I was fishing another good jetty to fish is the both sides of Montauk Harbor, also a whole blackfish. And I was walking out, and I saw there's just a circle, like in between, you know, a small like opening in between the rocks. And I actually took my jig, and you know, there was water on my one side, water on the other side, and I dropped the jig in between like all the rocks in the middle of the jetty, and I was catching blackfish in between the hole in the middle of the jetty and the rocks. So these fish are in those rocks. You know, I mean, they're really in there. So again, the closer to the rocks you can be, the more bites and fish you're going to catch. But again, you do run the risk of snagging if you get too close. So a lot of times when I go to these certain spots, I try and learn where the snag spots are, like around the jetties, the spots that you'll snag up almost every cast. Then the spots that you can work a lot easier and you won't snag as easily, and you can still catch fish. As we know, the South Shore inlets have a lot of current too. So again, the same concept applies where I do like to fish these slower periods of tide around the South Shore inlets. I know Mauritius, Shinnecock, Fire Island, you know, the jetties to the west, these jetties all have super current, and sometimes if you pitch in the wrong spot, or you pitch your jig anywhere, or your rig anywhere for that matter, your rig or your bait's get washed out right away, and you're gonna get snagged. It's gonna push it right into the rocks, and you're just gonna have a bad time. Again, the last hour, the slack is a great time, especially to fish these South Shore inlets, because again, as my diver friends told me, a lot of these fish, when the tide is still moving, they hang inside the rocks. They burrow themselves in the rocks. When the tide slows down, these fish start to come out and investigate, especially the bigger fish. They'll come out and investigate, see what's going on. They don't want to spend a lot of energy, so you know, when the tide slows down, they can move around a lot easier and navigate throughout the rocks, picking off crustaceans, crabs, mussels, whatever it may be. That's typically the time they will do that kind of thing. So if you're looking for a big shorebound tog, try fishing more of the slack period of tide. Again, the outgoing can be good too. Sometimes I look for spots in the inlet where rocks form little back eddies. They form little, what I call dead spots in the water, where there's no current, and you can pitch something in there, and a lot of times there'll be a lot of tog hanging in a spot like that as well, because again, they don't like to expend a lot of energy, and you know, that's just where they're going to feed. That's where the crabs are gathering and stuff like that, because the current isn't sucking them away. So you got the South Shore jetties, you got all the bridges around the island. Again, most of the bridges around the island are all holding blackfish. The entire North Shore stretch as well. So when I say North Shore, I mean from the tip of Orient Point going all the way to the west end. There is potential for shorebound tog fishing in all those spots. And if you think there might be tog there, I would definitely focus in on those spots to try and catch some. Any questions so far about spots on tog fishing? Anything specific that anyone know? Yes?
Do you think those spots get fished out?
That's a great question. So it actually brings me to another point. There are spots that get certainly fished out, and those are more the spots that are more traveled to, if you know what I'm saying. So, say for example, I'll give you a personal example of mine. I fish a spot on the North Shore, out on the North Fork. End of a road, you can park your car, get out of your car, you walk, big rock right in front of you right there. What do you think everybody's fishing? That rock. So, I've tried fishing it, obviously, and I picked a couple small ones. But every time I go there, there may be somebody there. There may not be. It's a high traffic spot. I'll walk, a mile down the beach or something like that, or some distance down the beach to a less fished rock, in my opinion, that I think people aren't fishing as much. And I can tell you that the fishing a mile down the beach, where I don't think people are traveling to as often, compared to the rock right in front of the parking spot, I'll limit out on the rock a mile down the beach. I'll have a hard time catching keepers sometimes on the rock right in front of the parking lot. So sometimes going the extra distance, literally traveling down the beach, walking down the beach, does make the difference. Especially in spots like that where it's just a single rock and the fish can be grouped up on a rock like that. The jetties, they're pretty good. They kind of replenish themselves. I think that the jetties, there's a lot of fish in the jetties, and it takes a while for them to start to get depleted. And by the time they do get depleted, it's usually too cold, and the fish start to move off to the wrecks and reefs anyway. But the jetties, I've actually done pretty good into like the beginning of November off the South Shore jetties. Like first week of November, I'm still catching pretty decent tog, keeper size tog off the South Shore jetties. But keep that in mind, guys. If you're not producing in one spot, definitely don't be afraid to walk a little ways down the beach, maybe somewhere where somebody hasn't been focusing in as much and putting as much pressure on it, and you'll catch more fish. These fish are very keyed in on structure. I do believe that they return to similar structure or in the same area year after year. And I believe that the fish that do get on a piece of structure during the time of the year, the fall, once they are depleted, that was the local population on that piece of structure. So traveling definitely makes a difference when it comes to finding better bites of blackfish. Another tip I can add in: there's been times when I've been fishing for blackfish off the shore, and I get to a spot, and I cast out, nothing happens, and then I, pull back in, rebait, cast out again, let the crab wash out, rebait, cast out again, and I start to get small nibbles. So what's happening is, in that process, is I'm essentially building a bite. Blackfish are very curious fish. They're very investigative. They go out. They won't start off feeding as aggressive as first. Usually takes them a little time to kind of warm up to what's going on, catch the scent of your bait, your green crabs, or whatever you're using. I give it before I give up on a spot and move on, and I think that the spot may be a little bit fished out or maybe just lax fish. I'll give it at least a good 20 minutes of me casting out, maybe getting a couple nibbles, letting the crab wash out, repeat the process, cast out again, do it again, before I can truly unlock the potential of what may be there that I may not have known if I just took a cast or two. I've had times where I had nothing at first, took about 20 minutes to build up a bite because, again, they got the scent trail going in the water. These fish, once you start getting them going, they'll feed like mad. And I've got into some of the best blackfish in the season because I built up that bite in that area and really got them feeding. That's another point I want to bring up is the baits to fish for blackfish as far as these shorebound spots go. So obviously my go-to bait, green crabs. I think a lot of you out there typically use green crabs as well. Easy to obtain. They sell them at tackle shops. The one really nice thing I like about green crabs, obviously, is they have a lot of guts in them. They have a lot of scent on them. And when I am fishing these blackfish, I'm always sure, cut them in half. I keep the top shells on, but I make sure that, that I don't really pick them apart too much so the scent can disperse too quickly. They're like little, you got to think of it as like little chum bombs that keep going out there every time. If you're fishing like, and again, there's been some rule changes with the Asian crabs. If nobody's aware yet. What's that?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I can't say I agree with it. I don't. I think it makes no sense to me. I actually wrote an editorial on it. But the new rule with green Asian crabs is you can harvest 50 a day, but you can only fish them from the spot you harvested them in, and then you have to kill them all after you're done fishing with them. So you can only if you go to a spot, this is what the DEC says, and you harvest them there, you can only fish with them in that certain spot. So, and they work too. But I think that green crabs, they actually disperse the scent a lot better. So green crabs will build a bite a lot better than Asian crabs will. Don't get me wrong, Asian crabs work very good. I've used them in the past. They're excellent bait as well. I've caught a lot of nice tog on them. But green crabs are definitely a steady, solid bait, and you're not going to do a disservice to yourself by using just green crabs. You have a really good shot at catching some really good fish. Other baits still on the table: sand fleas, fiddler crabs, hermit crabs. You don't use hermit crabs; they're too expensive for this type of fishing, especially your early season. But fiddler crabs, sand fleas on the beach, if you want to rake them up, they work very good as well. But in my opinion, green crabs are still king for this kind of fishing. Definitely want to build your bites with those green crabs. Get the bite going in those spots before you give up on a spot. This goes for all these spots. You may not know what's going on there right away because you may not be getting hits right away, but you build up the bite, you get more hits, then you're really going to unlock what you can actually catch in those spots. Any questions on anything so far? Yes, sir.
Is there like an ideal depth? I know you want to be, slack to first hour of outgoing, but is there like in that nice tide, is there like a preferred depth that you?
Yes, so I found that fishing on the north shore of the islands, most of the spots, especially out on the North Fork side of the island where I fish a lot, but this goes for most of the island, is obviously on most of the north side of the island is the tide changes are a lot more drastic than on the south shore.
Right.
So when the south shore gets 2 to 3 foot changes, the north shore you're seeing up to like 8 feet some places. Depending on the moon phase and stuff like that. That's why I like to fish around the higher points of the tide, solely mostly on the north shore. Higher points on the tide, there's a lot more of that water closer to shore. Those tide that may have been a little bit further off, or they pull in a little bit to pick off those crabs and whatnot that are in the rocks that are closer to shore. Typically, a lot of the spots that I fish, and I'm sure a lot of people may be aware of this, but some people may not be. Is I'm pitching to spots from here to the door that are 12 feet deep, and that's not far at all, right there.
Right.
In those spots. So I've caught in tog in 6 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet. They're in all those depths early in the season.
Okay.
They could even be in shallower sometimes. But a lot of the spots that I'm fishing out that way, landing at 8 to 12, maybe 15 feet in some deeper spots. That depth right there. South Shore inlets, they're typically a little deeper. I would have to guess that they're anywhere from 8 to 15 to 20 feet, a lot of them that I'm pitching to these spots.
Right.
So those depths, early season tog depths, those are perfect. There will be fish in those depths until I would say at least the end of October, depending on how cold the water gets. If it gets cold too quickly, obviously they'll push out a little further. I've noticed on the South Shore they do stick around a little bit longer. But stick to those depths. Those depths are typically what you will encounter either on the South Shore inlet. Bridges get pretty deep too, so that you get those depths around the bridges as well, and on the North Shore as well. Especially during the high tide. So that's why I emphasize the higher points of the tide on the North Shore, is because you're looking at like 6 to 8 feet difference in tide. So stick to the higher tides on the North Shore. I've always done better like that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
Good to know.
So moving on from spots. So those are general spots, and when I say general, I mean, again, Shinnecock, Mauritius, Fire Island, Jones Inlet, Breezy, all those spots have fish. I spend a lot of time personally in Mauritius. I'll tell you guys that. But all those spots have potential for tog. So it's not like this one rock on the jetty, produces more than the other, which sometimes maybe that is the case, depending on how the tide is setting up or something like that. But any jetty you go to, like one of these jetties, any of you guys go to any of those jetties, if you fish them already, if you don't, if you want to try to fish them, there's a good shot that you guys can get into some decent black fishing on any of those spots. Again, the North Shore, it's such a big stretch that for me to say, go to this rock at this specific tide, there's a lot of rocks to go to. So part of the adventure for me, part of the best part of it for me for fishing a lot of these spots was discovering where there was fish. Like I said before, the spot where you walk out of your car and the rock is right there, a lot of times that spot didn't produce for me. So, if I went for a walk by myself down the beach, when there was nobody around, and I found a nice, promising looking rock that was, say, from here to the door away right there, and I started pitching to it, a lot of times that rock produced pretty well. I was able to get my limit off that rock up to like 5-pound fish, which are very respectable off the shore. Fight very hard at 5-pound fish, so to catch them off the shore is a nice fish off the shore. So moving on to setups. I said I'd speak about setups today as well. I like to bring a 2-rod combo. It's like a 2-rod attack I go with when I go for these fish. So I was talking about before, there's a certain tides I like to fish. I like to fish like the end of the end of the incoming, the slack period, and then that beginning of the outgoing for the most part for these fish. Obviously when the tide is still moving, end of the incoming, I'm talking to the last 2 hours, the last hour and a half of the incoming, get that slack period, first hour, 2 hours of the outgoing. During the moving parts of the tide, where it's still incoming and then it begins to go outgoing, I find myself using more of a rig setup. I'm talking very simple, very minimalistic kind of rig. All it is I have a tide on right here. This is pretty much the rod I will use for shorebound fishing for my rigs, fishing with rigs for blackfish. All it is just a sinker loop at the bottom. Got about a 6 foot, 7 foot leader right there, 60-pound monofilament. And I do a single dropper loop right here. And I'll put either a 3.0 or a 4.0 bait holder or octopus hook in here. I like to keep it really simple. Again, it's snaggy when we're fishing for a lot of these fish. If you're not getting caught up sometimes you're not fishing the right structure. Getting caught up in blackfish is all part of the game, especially from the shore. So the less hooks I have going on, the less double rigs I have going on when I'm fishing off the shore for blackfish, the better. Again, single sinker loop right there. I don't use any terminal stuff on this. It's not going to bust a guide on me. That's no problem at all. Uni nut passes through these size guides very easily. No clips, no metal clips as far as like sinker snaps go. I don't use any sinker snaps or anything like that. Anything that I think has a better chance of getting hooked up on a stray piece of like monofilament or braid in the water, I'm going to take that off. So single loop, again, octopus or bait holder hook here. Keep it real simple. Again, simple is better when doing the shorebound fishing like this. I know some of you may have used like a snafu rig, which is a double rig for blackfish. You're using bigger baits and stuff like that. But for the shorebound fishing, when these fish they run for the rocks, you want less to get snagged on. So if there's another hook flying around, there's a good chance that hook could snag into some stray monofilament or braid or get caught in some structure, and you're going to lose that fish. So that's the setup itself. The on the terminal end right here, as far as the leader goes and stuff like that. As far as the braid goes, 30-pound braid is fine. I've used 30-pound braid for this fishing most times. Remember, you want to use a long enough leader, because especially when fishing at the angle you're casting at the rocks. Typically, the first thing that's always going to touch is the leader, if your leader is long enough. If you have a short little leader down to here, and you're at this angle, the first thing that's going to touch would be your braid. So you want to extend your leader. Don't be afraid to go too long, especially if you're fishing direct and you can reel your knot through your guides. I fish sometimes on the jetties. I fish up to 10, 12-foot leaders, because the first thing that you want to touch before the braid is always your leader. Your braid does not have the abrasion resistance that your leader has. So fishing like a 60-pound braid like this, if it's touching, it could still pop it. Like I said, if it rubs it enough, but it's definitely going to have more abrasion resistance as compared to 30-pound braid, a 60-pound monofilament over 30-pound braid. Definitely go with something like that. As far as the reel goes, I like this 5000 reel, Shimano Stratic. Anything comparable would work as well. I just find it's very comfortable for me. Holds 30-pound braid. This 9-foot surf rod, I can handle probably up to 3 or 4 ounces of lead with it, with a piece of bait on it. So again, 9-foot surf rod. I don't like going anything bigger than 9. Sometimes I use like an 8 or a 9 for the rig rod. But I feel as if the 9, you get enough leverage. You can also pinpoint your cast pretty good. But it's also not too much. So like a 10-foot or an 11-foot, you're fishing for these fish. They're not always the biggest fish. Might be overpowering for the fish. And the finesse aspect of it kind of goes out the window when you start to fish up a 10 or 11-foot surf rod for blackfish with a rig. So this rod, I can even fish this rod under my arm, as you can see. This 9-foot, it's not on the lighter side. It's up to 4 ounces, 1 to 4 it's rated. But I can fish this rod under my arm comfortably if I feel comfortable like that. I can fish like this comfortably. Rod doesn't weigh, this setup doesn't weigh much at all. Afterwards, you guys feel free to check it out just to get an idea of what may work for you. But this seems to work pretty good for me for throwing, a rig setup off the shore for blackfish. Moving on, talked about the slack period of time when I fish for blackfish. When it becomes more like slack period, I really like to finesse them more. I like to use a lot lighter weight. A lot of the fishing I do is on the lighter side. So, especially with blackfish, if I can go light for blackfish, I'm definitely going to go light. This happens to be my setup that I've gotten very... Is it a question about? This is rated 1 to 4, so I can throw up to 4 ounces. It has some backbone to it. Obviously, I'll let you see this setup later on. You want something that you can muscle these fish out with sometimes, because when they dive in, and if you got like a sinker on there as well, you really want to be able to muscle these things out of rocks at times. So you don't want something too flimsy, or else they're gonna. If you hook anything decent, anything 3 to 5, 6, 7 pounds off the shore, they're gonna definitely work you. You know what I'm saying? So, but you want a little backbone. When the tide slacks out, I like to have a little fun. Got 7/6 setup right here. This one is a Okuma SRT Inshore Elite. Again, it doesn't have to be this. It could be whatever you guys feel comfortable with, but this is the rod I've been using. This is rated up to, let's see here, 2.5 ounces. So it's rated 1/2 ounce to 2.5 ounces, which I'm not throwing jigs typically over 1 ounce. A lot of the jigs I'm throwing are either 1/2, 3/4, or 1. Because I find that at slack periods of time, a 1/2, a 3/4, or a 1 can get down in the depths that I'm fishing, which is anywhere from 8 to 20 feet. There's no current. The jig will flutter right down, and as long as I'm on the bottom, I'm in the strike zone for these fish. I like the shorter rod for the jigs. I feel as if I get more control. I can have more finesse with them. I can also cast small jigs like this one a lot more accurately when I'm fishing a 7'6" shorter rod like this in comparison to a 9-foot rod. Still got some backbone on this rod right here. Again, it's rated from 1/2 to 2.5 ounces. But if I hook a good sized fish, it's definitely going to. I'm definitely gonna have a good fight in my hands. As far as the leader goes, this leader right here is about 6-7 feet. Again, uni to uni knot, something that I can cast through the guides because you want to fish that extended leader, especially off the shore for blackfish, where these fish are going to run you into the rocks. As far as jigs go, bring plenty of them because, again, part of the game is getting snagged up and stuff like that. There's certain spots that I found that jigs don't work as good as the rig. That's another thing I want to bring up. Sometimes the blackfish don't really care whether the bait is sitting on the bottom or if the bait is suspended, like it would be with this setup right over here. So as you can see, the the drop loop is tied in about a little over a foot up from where the sinker would be. Sometimes the fish feed a little differently whether the jig is sitting on the bottom versus when the bait's suspended. I've noticed that maybe when there's some other structure on the bottom, the jig would get lost in that structure. Meanwhile, like the sinker would be in the structure and the bait would be above, be suspended where it would be visible for the blackfish. So I've noticed that at times too. Back to the setup over here. 7'6" as far as the reel goes. I got a 4,000 size reel, which is a great pairing.
All right, guys. Unfortunately, I'm having some wire problems again with my microphone. So as you hear some parts of the video, you hear a little staticky. So right now, Matt's basically going over his tackle bag, what he has, and he's showing us his assortment of leader materials. And now he's got a box with terminal tackle such as jigs, sinkers, swivels. He was explaining to us, and all those little goodies in that one Polano box he has, and then 2 spools of different mono leaders. He also explained that the reason why he has 2 scissors in his bag, it's very common to lose a pair of scissors, and if you're up and you walked a mile to the rocks, it's always good to have a second pair of scissors on hand, just in case you lost one, if one snapped, if one rusted up and you couldn't open it. It's always good, a smart move to have a little redundancy and have 2 pairs of scissors in your bag, and he talked about that for a little bit. Also, another thing I would add, he didn't have, is I would add a hook out, which helps a lot because these fish are so slimy. It's a lot quicker just to, grab the hook out, grab the hook, pop the fish off, let it drop back into the water if it's not a keeper. You don't have to worry about getting a rag to wash your hands, and you're going to get out and back into the water a lot faster. Who wants to climb down rocks and wash your hands in the seawater? I wouldn't, because you could slip and possibility of getting hurt. So also in his bag, he has a pair of pliers he's showing you. And it's a nice little, it's a little compact bag. Everything's on there. So he'll explain how when he's walking down a beach, how this small little bag is basically nothing to hold. He just whips it right over his shoulder, and he's good to go. And he could walk, and his 2 rods that he takes with him, and he could just basically, he'll demonstrate how he does his walk for you and how easy it is to carry things. He's also demonstrating in his other hand, there's an imaginary bucket there, halfway filled with his green crabs or his Asian crabs, whatever it might be that he's using for that day of fishing. But again, you can see him. It's very easy, very light. You're not taking too much tackle with you. You just want to, make it as easy as possible. If you're walking far distances, you could walk from right outside the car or maybe a mile or 2 down the beach to get to the rock piles that you might want. But again, I apologize for the microphone crapping out on me. Something's going on with this wire. I definitely got to fix it, but I still can't get to the bottom of it. This is like the 3rd video now. But anyhow, back to what he's doing is just basically explaining now how he walks down the beach and how easy it is with his tackle and everything like that to get to the spots that he needs. But other than that, that's basically the end of the video. He did a great job, and we thank you, Matt, for explaining everything about shore blackfishing. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you guys at the shows, and we'll catch you all on the next one. Thank you very much.